A young black waitress named Aisha endures humiliation at the hands of a group of wealthy women, led by the arrogant Victoria, while simply trying to do her job. But what these women don't realize is that Aisha's quiet strength and dignity will lead to consequences far beyond what anyone could have imagined. So, how does Aisha's resilience transform the situation? And what surprising turn of events does it lead to? Stick around to find out. But before we dive into the story, comment below where you're watching from today, and if you enjoy this tale, don't forget to subscribe. The Golden Spoon stood as a beacon of luxury in the heart of the city, its gleaming exterior a promise of the opulence within. As the sun dipped below the skyline, casting a warm glow across the bustling streets, the restaurant's doors swung open to welcome its exclusive clientele. Crystal chandeliers twinkled overhead, their light dancing off polished silver and sparkling glassware. The air was thick with the aroma of exquisite cuisine and the soft murmur of refined conversation. Amidst this sea of extravagance, Aisha moved with practiced grace. At 25, she was a study in contrasts. Her simple black uniform a stark counterpoint to the designer labels that adorned the restaurant's patrons. Her dark skin glowed under the warm lighting, and her eyes, bright with determination, scanned the room as she navigated between tables. Aisha's life outside these gilded walls was a world apart. In a small apartment across town, her mother and younger siblings waited for her return. Every step she took on the polished marble floor was a step towards their dreams. A better education for her siblings, a more comfortable life for her mother, and maybe, just maybe, a chance at college for herself. As she refilled water glasses and cleared plates, Aisha's mind wandered to the stack of community college brochures hidden beneath her bed. The weight of her family's hopes rested squarely on her shoulders, driving her to work longer hours and take on extra shifts. Yet, despite the exhaustion that often threatened to overwhelm her, Aisha's smile never wavered. Her kindness was a beacon in the often cold and impersonal world of high-end dining. Aisha called Mr. Thompson, the restaurant manager. Table 12 needs attention. It's Ms. Victoria and her friends. Aisha's heart sank. Victoria Harrington was a regular at the Golden Spoon, known as much for her cutting remarks as for her hefty tips. With a deep breath, Aisha straightened her apron and made her way to the table. Victoria sat at the head of the table, her platinum blonde hair swept into an immaculate updo. Designer sunglasses perched atop her head, despite the dimly lit interior. To her right sat Olivia, whose family owned half the city's real estate. Across from her was Samantha, a former model turned socialite. Rounding out the group was Elizabeth, whose husband's tech company had just gone public. As Aisha approached, the women's laughter died down, replaced by pointed looks and raised eyebrows. Well, Victoria drawled, her voice dripping with feigned sweetness. Look who they've sent to serve us today. How quaint. Aisha forced a smile. Good evening, ladies. Welcome back to the Golden Spoon. May I start you off with some drinks? Olivia snickered behind her hand. Oh, honey, do you even know the difference between a Chateau Margaux and a bottle of $2 Chuck? Aisha's cheeks burned, but she kept her composure. Our sommelier would be happy to assist with wine selections. In the meantime, perhaps some water? Water? Samantha scoffed. Do we look like we're here for a health cleanse? Bring us a bottle of Dom Perignon. You do know what that is, don't you? Swallowing her pride, Aisha nodded. Of course. I'll fetch that right away. As she turned to leave, Victoria's voice stopped her. Oh, and dear, try not to trip over those clumsy feet of yours. We wouldn't want any accidents. The women's laughter followed Aisha as she retreated to the bar. Her hands shook slightly as she relayed the order to the bartender. You okay? He asked, concern etching his features. Aisha nodded, forcing a smile. I'm fine. Just another day at the Golden Spoon, right? As she waited for the champagne, Aisha's mind drifted to her mother's words from that morning. Hold your head high, baby, she had said, straightening Aisha's collar. You're worth more than any of those fancy folks could ever know. With renewed determination, Aisha carefully balanced the ice bucket and flutes on her tray. She wouldn't let these women see her falter. Returning to the table, Aisha began to pour the champagne with practiced precision. The women continued their conversation as if she were invisible. "Did you see what Melissa's daughter wore to the benefit last night?" Elizabeth gossiped. "Absolutely tragic. Some people simply don't know how to dress for these events." Victoria nodded sagely. "It's to be expected, really. You can't buy class, after all." Her eyes flicked meaningfully to Aisha. Aisha's hand trembled slightly, but she managed to pour without spilling a drop. As she finished, Victoria's manicured hand shot out, grabbing her wrist. My, Victoria tooted, examining Aisha's hand. "Look at these nails. Don't they give you girls manicures as part of your uniform? Or is this intentional?" Aisha gently extracted her hand. "Is there anything else I can get for you ladies?" Samantha leaned forward, her eyes gleaming with malice. "Actually, yes. We were hoping you could tell us about the specials. In detail. I'm sure you've tried them all, given your figure." The women tittered, and Aisha felt her face grow hot. She launched into a recitation of the evening's specials, trying to keep her voice steady as the women exchanged amused glances. As Aisha finished, Victoria waved her hand dismissively. "That all sounds so pedestrian. Surely there must be something more exciting? Or is this the best your little establishment can offer?" Aisha bit her tongue, reminding herself that these women's opinion of her didn't define her worth. "Our chef would be happy to prepare something special if you have any particular requests." Elizabeth snorted, as if she'd know what to do with real cuisine. "I bet her idea of fine dining is a bucket of fried chicken." The women erupted into laughter, not bothering to lower their voices. Other diners began to glance over, some with disapproval, others with uncomfortable amusement. Aisha stood there, feeling exposed and humiliated. She wanted nothing more than to run from the restaurant and never look back. But the faces of her family flashed before her eyes. Her mother's tired smile, her sister's hopeful gaze as she pored over college brochures, her little brother's gap-toothed grin when she brought home leftover desserts. Taking a deep breath, Aisha straightened her spine and plastered on a smile. "I'll give you ladies a few more minutes with the menu. Please don't hesitate to ask if you need any recommendations." As she turned to leave, Victoria called out, "Oh, and darling, do try to walk a little more gracefully. You're lumbering about like an elephant in a china shop." More laughter followed Aisha as she made her way back to the kitchen. Once out of sight, she leaned against the cool stainless steel counter, fighting back tears. "Hey," a soft voice said. Aisha looked up to see Maria, one of the other waitresses, watching her with concern. "Those hags giving you trouble again?" Aisha managed a weak smile. "Nothing I can't handle." Maria squeezed her shoulder. "You're worth 100 of them. You know that? Don't let them get to you." Aisha nodded, grateful for the support. She took a moment to compose herself, then square her shoulders. She had a job to do, and she'd do it with dignity, no matter how these women treated her. As the evening wore on, Victoria and her friends continued their barrage of thinly veiled insults and demeaning comments. They sent back dishes, complained about the temperature of their drinks, and made increasingly outrageous demands. Through it all, Aisha maintained her professionalism. She answered their jabs with polite smiles, fulfilled their requests without complaint, and even managed to upsell them on an expensive bottle of wine. As Aisha returned to the dining room after serving the main course, she could feel the tension in the air thicken. Victoria and her friends had been difficult from the start, but now their behavior was escalating to new levels of cruelty. She took a deep breath, steadying herself for what was to come. "Oh, look who's finally back," Victoria sneered, her voice dripping with disdain. "We were beginning to think you'd forgotten about us, dear." Aisha forced a polite smile. "I apologize for any delay, ma'am. Is there anything else I can get for you?" The woman to Victoria's left, a redhead with an overly Botoxed face, piped up, "Yes, actually, this water isn't cold enough. Bring me a fresh glass with extra ice. And make it snappy." "Of course, right away," Aisha replied, turning to fetch the water. "And while you're at it," another woman chimed in, "my salad fork is slightly crooked. I simply cannot eat with such shoddy tableware. Replace it immediately." Aisha nodded, her jaw clenching imperceptibly. She hurried to fulfill their demands, all too aware of their eyes, following her every move. As she returned with the requested items, Victoria's voice cut through the air like a knife. You call that service? I've seen snails move faster. Perhaps if you spent less time on that ridiculous hairstyle and more on your job, you'd be somewhat competent. The table erupted in cruel laughter, and Aisha felt her cheeks burn with humiliation. She wanted to snap back, to defend herself, but she knew she couldn't. This job was too important. Instead, she swallowed her pride and asked, "Is there anything else I can do for you ladies?" Victoria's eyes glinted maliciously. "Oh, I'm sure we can think of something. Can't we, girls?" What followed was a barrage of increasingly unreasonable demands. They ordered Aisha to adjust the lighting, complained about non-existent drafts, and sent her back and forth to the kitchen with trivial requests. Each time she returned, they found something new to criticize. This napkin has a wrinkle. How am I supposed to use this? I asked for my steak well done. This is clearly medium well. Take it back. Are you sure this wine is the right temperature? It tastes off. Aisha did her best to accommodate their requests, all while maintaining her composure. But with each passing moment, she could feel her resolve weakening. The constant barrage of insults and demands was wearing her down, chip by chip. As she was clearing some dishes, the Botoxed redhead accidentally knocked over her water glass. "Oops," she said with faux innocence. "Be a dear and clean that up, won't you?" Aisha bit her lip, kneeling to mop up the spill. As she did, she could hear them whispering and giggling above her. "Look at her down there, where she belongs, if you ask me. I bet she's used to being on her knees. Probably the only position she's good at." Their words stung like physical blows, each one a reminder of the gulf between their worlds. Aisha tried to tune them out, focusing instead on the task at hand. But their laughter seemed to echo in her ears, drowning out everything else. As she stood up, her uniform damp from the spilled water, Aisha caught a glimpse of herself in a nearby mirror. For a moment, she hardly recognized the woman staring back at her. Where was the strong, confident person she'd always prided herself on being? How had she let these women reduce her to this? In that instant, her mother's words came floating back to her. "Never let anyone make you feel less than you are, Aisha," she'd always said. "Your dignity isn't something they can take from you. Only you can give it away." Aisha straightened her back, drawing strength from the memory. She wouldn't let these women break her. She couldn't. But Victoria wasn't done yet. As Aisha approached the table once more, the socialite's eyes narrowed. "You know," she said loudly, ensuring everyone nearby could hear, "I'm beginning to think you're not cut out for this job. Perhaps you'd be better suited to simpler work. Do they need help in the kitchen? I'm sure you'd excel at washing dishes." The table erupted in laughter once more, and Aisha felt her face burn with shame and anger. She opened her mouth to respond, but Victoria cut her off. "Oh, don't bother trying to defend yourself, dear. We all know the truth. People like you just aren't meant for jobs that require sophistication." Aisha's hands trembled as she clenched them at her sides. She wanted to scream, to tell them off, to make them understand how wrong they were. But she knew she couldn't. This job was her lifeline, her means of supporting her family and saving for her dreams. She couldn't risk losing it, no matter how badly these women treated her. So instead, she swallowed her pride once more and asked, "Is there anything else I can get for you, ma'am?" Victoria's lips curled into a cruel smile. "Actually, yes. I think I'd like some more wine. The red, please." Aisha nodded and turned to fetch the wine, grateful for the momentary reprieve. But as she returned with the bottle, she could see the malicious glint in Victoria's eye. She knew something was coming, but she was powerless to stop it. As Aisha leaned in to pour the wine, Victoria suddenly jerked her arm, sending the glass flying. Rich, red liquid splashed across Aisha's pristine white uniform, staining it beyond repair. "Oh my!" Victoria exclaimed with exaggerated dismay. "How clumsy of you! I can't believe you'd be so careless with such an expensive wine." Aisha stood there, frozen in shock, as the wine seeped into her clothes. She could feel every eye in the restaurant on her, could hear the hushed whispers and poorly concealed snickers. Victoria's voice cut through the silence, loud and accusatory. "This is absolutely unacceptable. Do you have any idea how much this outfit costs? I demand to speak to your manager immediately." Aisha tried to explain, to defend herself, but Victoria's shrill voice drowned her out. "I don't want to hear your excuses. This level of incompetence is astounding. You should be ashamed of yourself." The other women at the table joined in, their voices a cacophony of mockery and derision. Aisha felt as if she were drowning, suffocating under the weight of their cruel words and judgmental stares. She looked around the restaurant, desperately seeking some form of support or understanding. But all she saw were averted gazes and uncomfortable expressions. Some patrons pretended not to notice, burying their faces in their menus or engaging in forced conversation. Others watched with a mix of pity and discomfort, but no one stepped forward to defend her. In that moment, Aisha felt utterly alone. She stood there, wine dripping from her ruined uniform, the target of ridicule and scorn. The injustice of it all threatened to overwhelm her. She had done nothing wrong, had only tried to do her job to the best of her ability. And yet here she was, humiliated and belittled simply because of who she was and where she came from. With her cheeks burning and tears threatening to spill, Aisha turned and fled the dining room. She could hear Victoria's mocking laughter following her, could feel the stares of the other patrons boring into her back. But she didn't stop until she reached the sanctuary of the employee restroom. Once inside, Aisha locked the door behind her and leaned against it, finally allowing the tears to fall. She slid down to the floor, her body shaking with silent sobs. All the pain, frustration, and anger she'd been holding back came pouring out in a torrent of emotion. As she sat there, surrounded by the stark white tiles of the bathroom, Aisha's mind raced. She thought about her life, about the long hours she worked, and the dreams she held close to her heart. She thought about her family, about her mother who had sacrificed so much to give her a chance at a better life. And she thought about the women in the dining room, women who had never known struggle or hardship, who saw people like her as nothing more than objects to be used and discarded. The unfairness of it all made her want to scream. But as the initial wave of emotion began to subside, something else started to take its place. A quiet determination, a spark of defiance that refused to be extinguished. Aisha's mother's words echoed in her mind once more. "Your dignity isn't something they can take from you. Only you can give it away." Slowly, Aisha stood up and faced her reflection in the mirror. Her uniform was ruined, her eyes red from crying, but there was a new strength in her gaze. She realized that this moment didn't have to define her. It could be the thing that broke her, or it could be the catalyst for something more. As she stared at herself, Aisha made a decision. She wouldn't let this humiliation be the end of her story. She wouldn't give Victoria and her friends the satisfaction of breaking her spirit. No, she would find a way to turn this around, to show them and everyone else that she was more than they could ever imagine. With trembling hands, Aisha began to clean herself up as best she could. She couldn't change her stained uniform, but she could hold her head high. She took deep breaths, centering herself and drawing on an inner well of strength she didn't know she possessed. Before leaving the bathroom, Aisha looked at herself one last time in the mirror. Gone was the defeated, humiliated woman who had entered. In her place stood someone stronger, someone determined to fight back against the injustice she had faced. "You are not defined by their words or actions," she told her reflection. "You are defined by how you choose to respond to them." With that, Aisha unlocked the door and stepped back out into the restaurant. She didn't know exactly what she was going to do yet, but she knew one thing for certain. This was not the end of her story. It was only the beginning. As she walked back towards the dining room, her mind was already racing with possibilities. How could she turn this situation around? How could she make Victoria and her friends understand the impact of their actions? And more importantly, how could she use this experience to make a difference, not just for herself, but for others who had faced similar humiliation? Aisha's steps grew more confident with each passing moment. She may have been knocked down, but she was far from out. Victoria and her friends had no idea what they had just set in motion. Their cruelty had awakened something in Aisha, a determination to fight back against the systemic injustices she and others like her faced every day. As she pushed open the door to the dining room, Aisha's eyes locked onto Victoria's table. The women were still there, laughing and chatting as if nothing had happened. But this time, instead of fear or shame, Aisha felt a surge of resolve. She straightened her back, lifted her chin, and walked purposefully towards them. She didn't know exactly what would happen next, but she knew one thing for certain. She was done being a victim. From this moment on, she would be the author of her own story. And as she approached the table, a plan began to form in her mind. A plan that would not only teach Victoria and her friends a lesson, but could potentially change the lives of countless others who had been silenced and humiliated. Aisha allowed herself a small, determined smile. They had no idea what was coming. She couldn't change who these women were, but she could change how she reacted to them. More importantly, she realized she had the power to shed light on their behavior and perhaps make a difference for others who face similar treatment. Approaching the table, Aisha plastered on a serene smile. "I apologize for the delay, ladies. Is there anything else I can get for you?" Victoria looked up, surprise flickering across her face at Aisha's composed demeanor. Well, look who decided to grace us with her presence again. I was beginning to think you'd run off in shame." Aisha's smile didn't waver. "I assure you, I'm here to provide you with the best service possible. Now, how about some dessert?" The women exchanged glances, clearly thrown off by Aisha's newfound confidence. Samantha recovered first, her lips curling into a sneer. "Dessert? Please. As if we'd trust you not to add a few extra calories to our plates out of spite." "I understand," Aisha replied smoothly. "Perhaps some coffee then? We have an excellent selection of single-origin beans." As she spoke, Aisha discreetly pressed the record button on her phone, which she had slipped into her apron pocket. She knew it was a risk, but it was one she was willing to take. Elizabeth waved her hand dismissively. Fine, bring us your best espresso, and try not to spill it this time." Aisha nodded and turned to leave, but Victoria's voice stopped her. "Oh, and Aisha, do try to hurry. Unlike some people, we have important engagements to attend to." As Aisha walked away, she heard the women's laughter behind her. But this time, it didn't sting. Instead, it fueled her determination. While preparing the coffee, Aisha's mind wandered to Sandra, a journalist she had befriended over the past year. Sandra often came to the Golden Spoon for lunch, always treating Aisha with kindness and respect. They had bonded over their shared experiences of facing discrimination, and Sandra had mentioned her desire to expose social injustices in their city. Aisha glanced at the clock. Sandra usually came in around this time for her afternoon coffee. With a bit of luck, she might be able to set her plan in motion sooner than expected. As if on cue, Sandra walked through the front door, her curly hair bouncing as she made her way to her usual table. Aisha's heart leaped. This was her chance. Balancing the tray of espressos, Aisha made her way back to Victoria's table. As she served the coffee, she kept her phone recording, capturing every snide comment and backhanded compliment. My, Victoria drawled, eyeing the cup suspiciously. "I'm surprised you managed to carry these without incident. Perhaps there's hope for you yet." Olivia chimed in, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "Yes, who knows? With enough practice, you might even be able to afford to dine at a place like this someday." "Well, maybe the kitchen at least." The women cackled, and Aisha forced herself to maintain her pleasant expression. "Is there anything else I can get for you, ladies?" "Yes, actually," Samantha said, a wicked glint in her eye. "I seem to have dropped my napkin. Be a dear and pick it up for me, won't you?" Aisha knew it was a trap, but she also knew her phone was still recording. Carefully, she bent down to retrieve the napkin, fully aware of the women's eyes on her. "My goodness," Elizabeth stage whispered. "The view from down there must be familiar to her. I hear that's how people like her usually make their money." The table erupted in cruel laughter, and Aisha felt her cheeks burn. But she straightened up, handed Samantha her napkin, and said calmly, "Here you are, ma'am." "Will that be all?" Victoria narrowed her eyes, clearly annoyed by Aisha's unflappable demeanor. "For now, but do stay close. We wouldn't want to have to strain our voices calling for you. As Aisha walked away, she caught Sandra's eye across the restaurant. The journalist raised an eyebrow, sensing that something was amiss. Aisha gave a subtle nod towards Victoria's table, then made her way to Sandra. "Hey, Aisha," Sandra greeted warmly. "Everything okay? You seem a bit tense." Aisha leaned in, keeping her voice low. "Sandra, I need your help. Those women at table 12, they've been horrible. I've been recording their comments, but I don't know what to do next." Sandra's eyes widened, then narrowed with determination. "Say no more. I've been looking for a story like this. Can you send me the recording?" Aisha nodded, quickly forwarding the audio file to Sandra's phone. "What should I do now?" Sandra thought for a moment. "Keep recording if you can. I'm going to make some calls. We might be able to turn this into something bigger than just one bad night at a restaurant." As Aisha returned to her duties, she felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, something good could come out of this horrible experience. Over the next hour, Aisha continued to serve Victoria and her friends, enduring their increasingly cruel comments with a mask of calm. Her phone captured it all: the deliberate spilling of drinks, the loud complaints about her service, the thinly veiled racial slurs. Meanwhile, Sandra worked furiously on her phone, making calls and sending messages. Aisha caught glimpses of her animated conversations, hope growing with each passing minute. As the evening wore on, Victoria's group showed no signs of leaving. They ordered more drinks, each round accompanied by a fresh barrage of insults and unreasonable demands. Aisha lost count of how many times she had to clean up accidental spills or retrieve dropped items from under the table. Finally, as the restaurant began to empty, Victoria signaled for the check. Aisha brought it over, her heart pounding. This was it, the moment of truth. As she handed Victoria the leather folder containing the bill, Aisha slipped a small note inside. It read simply, "I hope you've enjoyed your evening. Rest assured, your words and actions have not gone unnoticed." Victoria opened the folder, her eyes scanning the note. For a moment, confusion flickered across her face, quickly replaced by anger. "What is the meaning of this?" she demanded, waving the note in Aisha's face. Aisha stood her ground, her voice steady. "It means exactly what it says, Ms. Victoria. Your behavior tonight, and on previous occasions, has been noted." The other women leaned in, reading the note over Victoria's shoulder. Samantha let out a harsh laugh. "Oh, please. What are you going to do? Complain to management? As if they believe you over us." Olivia nodded, smirking. "Exactly. It's your word against ours, dear. And let's be honest, we all know whose word carries more weight in this world." Victoria crumpled the note, tossing it onto the table. "Listen here, you insignificant little dash." But before she could finish her sentence, the restaurant's doors burst open. Sandra walked in, flanked by a small camera crew. Behind them came Mr. Thompson, the restaurant manager, looking both confused and concerned. "What is the meaning of this?" Mr. Thompson demanded, hurrying over to Victoria's table. "Ms. Harrington, I apologize for this interruption dash." Sandra stepped forward, her press badge glinting under the restaurant's lights. "Good evening, ladies. I'm Sandra Chun from the City Tribune. We're doing a story on elitism and racism in high-end establishments, and we've received some rather interesting information about your behavior here tonight." The color drained from Victoria's face. This is preposterous. You can't just barge in here with cameras. Do you know who I am?" Sandra's smile was razor-sharp. "Oh, we know exactly who you are, Ms. Harrington, and we know what you've been saying and doing. In fact, we have it all on record." With a nod from Sandra, one of her crew members played back some of the audio Aisha had recorded. The women's cruel comments filled the air, their voices unmistakable. You recorded us?" Elizabeth sputtered, looking from Aisha to Sandra in disbelief. "That's illegal. We'll sue." Sandra shook her head. "Actually, in this state, it's perfectly legal to record conversations in public spaces without consent. In a restaurant, I'm afraid, qualifies as a public space." Victoria stood up abruptly, her chair screeching against the floor. "This is absurd. Mr. Thompson, I demand you remove these people at once." But Mr. Thompson hesitated, his eyes darting between Victoria and the cameras. "Ms. Harrington, Perhaps we should all calm down and dash. Calm down? Victoria screeched. Do you have any idea what this could do to my reputation? To all of our reputations. Aisha watched as the scene unfolded, a mix of emotions swirling within her. Part of her felt vindicated, seeing these women squirm under the spotlight they so often shone on others. But another part of her felt a twinge of sadness. How had these women become so cruel, so disconnected from the humanity of others? Sandra turned to Aisha, her expression softening. Aisha, would you like to say anything? This is your chance to speak your truth. All eyes turned to Aisha. For a moment, she felt the weight of their stares, the pressure of the moment. But then she remembered her mother's words, her own newfound strength. She took a deep breath and spoke. I don't want to vilify anyone, Aisha began, her voice steady. What I want is for people to understand that words have power. The way we treat others, especially those we perceive as beneath us, says more about our character than any designer label or social status ever could. She turned to Victoria and her friends, meeting their eyes one by one. I hope that hearing your own words played back to you has given you pause. I hope it makes you think about the impact you have on the people around you. Because at the end of the day, we're all human. We all deserve respect and kindness. A heavy silence fell over the restaurant. Victoria and her friends stood frozen, a mix of shock, anger, and perhaps a glimmer of shame on their faces. Mr. Thompson looked torn between damage control and a grudging admiration for Aisha's words. Sandra nodded approvingly. Well said, Aisha. Now, Ms. Harrington, would you care to comment on your behavior this evening? Victoria's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. For once, the socialite seemed at a loss. Olivia, always quick to recover, stepped forward. This is all a misunderstanding. We were simply joking around. Aisha knows we didn't mean any harm. Don't you, dear? But Aisha stood firm. I think the recordings speak for themselves, ma'am. As the reality of the situation sank in, the women's bravado began to crumble. Elizabeth muttered something about calling her lawyer, while Samantha edged towards the exit. Victoria, however, seemed to deflate before their eyes. Her carefully constructed facade of superiority cracked, revealing a glimpse of the insecurity beneath. I didn't realize, she began, then trailed off, unable to finish. Sandra's camera crew captured it all. The women's initial arrogance, their dawning realization, and finally, their hasty retreat from the restaurant. As they fled, Sandra turned to Aisha with a smile. Thank you, Aisha. Your bravery tonight might just change some minds and open some eyes. Are you ready to tell your full story? Aisha nodded, a mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration washing over her. Yes, I think I am. As Sandra began to interview her, Aisha felt a weight lift from her shoulders. She had stood up not just for herself, but for everyone who had ever been made to feel small or unworthy. It wasn't about revenge or humiliation. It was about shining a light on a problem that had been in the shadows for far too long. Mr. Thompson approached Aisha, his expression a mix of concern and admiration. Aisha, I had no idea. I'm so sorry you've had to endure this. Please know that this kind of behavior won't be tolerated in my restaurant. Not from anyone. Aisha smiled, grateful for his support. Thank you, Mr. Thompson. I hope this could be a turning point, not just for me, but for all of us. As the night wound down and the camera crew packed up their equipment, Aisha found herself alone in the now quiet restaurant. She looked around at the gleaming surfaces and expensive decor, seeing it all with new eyes. This place that had been the site of so much pain and humiliation now felt different, like a battlefield where she had finally claimed victory. But it wasn't just about winning, Aisha realized. It was about changing the narrative, about showing that dignity and strength could come from unexpected places. As she hung up her apron and prepared to leave, Aisha felt a sense of purpose she had never experienced before. Tomorrow would bring new challenges she knew. There would be fallout from tonight's events, questions to answer, and possibly even more obstacles to overcome. But for the first time in a long while, Aisha felt ready to face whatever came her way. She stepped out into the cool night air, taking a deep breath. The city lights twinkled around her, full of possibility. Aisha squared her shoulders and began her walk home, her head held high. She had turned the tables tonight, not just on Victoria and her friends, but on the very system that had tried to keep her down. As she walked, Aisha's mind drifted to her family, to her mother's wisdom, her siblings' dreams. She couldn't wait to share this moment with them, to show them that standing up for oneself could lead to real change. And perhaps, Aisha thought with a small smile, this was just the beginning. Maybe her story could inspire others to speak up, to challenge the status quo. Maybe, just maybe, she could be part of something bigger than herself. With each step, Aisha felt stronger, more determined. The path ahead was uncertain, but she was ready to walk it with courage and grace. After all, she had learned the most valuable lesson of all, that true power comes not from wealth or status, but from the strength of one's character and the courage to stand up for what's right. As Aisha disappeared into the night, the city hummed around her, unaware that a small but significant shift had occurred. In one corner of this vast metropolis, a young woman had refused to be silenced, and in doing so, had set in motion a chain of events that just might change things for the better. The story of the black waitress and the rich women was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning, and Aisha, with her newfound voice and unwavering spirit, was ready to write the next chapter. The morning after the confrontation at the Golden Spoon, Aisha woke to the incessant buzzing of her phone. Bleary-eyed, she reached for it, expecting to see her usual morning alarm. Instead, she found a flood of notifications, missed calls, text messages, and social media alerts. For a moment, confusion clouded her mind. Then, the events of the previous night came rushing back. The cruel comments, the spilled wine, the hidden recording, and finally, Sandra's dramatic entrance with the camera crew. Aisha sat up in bed, her heart racing as she began to scroll through the notifications. The first thing she saw was a text from Sandra. Aisha, the story's gone live. Brace yourself, it's spreading like wildfire. With trembling fingers, Aisha opened her social media apps. Her eyes widened as she saw her name trending, accompanied by hashtags like #JusticeForAisha and #StandAgainstElitism. The video of last night's confrontation, skillfully edited by Sandra's team, had been shared thousands of times overnight. As Aisha scrolled through the comments, she felt a mix of emotions wash over her. There was overwhelming support, people praising her courage, sharing their own stories of workplace discrimination, and calling for action against Victoria and her friends. But there was also an undercurrent of negativity, some accusing her of playing the victim, others defending the rich women's right to speak their minds. A knock on her bedroom door jolted Aisha from her digital trance. "Aisha, are you awake?" Her mother's voice was tinged with concern. "Come in, Mama," Aisha called out, her voice shakier than she'd intended. Her mother entered, worry etched on her face. "Baby, what's going on?" "Your phone's been ringing nonstop, and there are reporters outside our building." Aisha patted the bed beside her, inviting her mother to sit. "Mama, remember how I told you about those mean women at the restaurant? Well, something happened last night." Over the next hour, Aisha recounted the events of the previous evening to her mother, showing her the viral video and the flood of responses. Her mother listened in silence, her expressions shifting from shock to anger to pride. When Aisha finished, her mother pulled her into a tight embrace. "Oh, my brave girl," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "You've always been strong, but this is something else. I'm so proud of you." Aisha felt tears prick her eyes. "I was so scared, Mama. I still am. What if I lose my job? What if Victoria and her friends sue me?" Her mother pulled back, cupping Aisha's face in her hands. "Listen to me. You did nothing wrong. You stood up for yourself and for everyone who's ever been treated like they're less than human. Whatever comes next, we'll face it together." Just then, Aisha's phone buzzed with an incoming call. It was Mr. Thompson, the restaurant manager. Aisha's heart leaped into her throat as she answered. "Aisha," Mr. Thompson's voice was grave. "I need you to come to the restaurant as soon as possible. We have a situation to discuss." As Aisha made her way to the Golden Spoon, she couldn't help but notice the stares and whispers that followed her. Some people smiled encouragingly, while others quickly averted their gaze. It seemed the whole city was talking about her. Outside the restaurant, a small crowd of reporters had gathered. Aisha slipped in through the back in trance, her heart pounding. What awaited her inside? Would she be fired? Sued? To her surprise, she found not just Mr. Thompson waiting for her, but also the restaurant's owner, a stern-looking woman named Mrs. Carlyle. Aisha's stomach dropped. "Aisha," Mrs. Carlyle began, her tone unreadable. "We've called you here to discuss last night's incident." Aisha straightened her spine, ready to defend herself. But before she could speak, Mrs. Carlyle continued. "What happened to you was unacceptable. We want you to know that we stand behind you completely." Aisha blinked, stunned. You do?" Mr. Thompson nodded. "We've been fielding calls all morning, from customers threatening to boycott us if we don't support you, from other employees sharing similar experiences, even from legal teams offering their services pro bono." Mrs. Carlyle leaned forward. "Aisha, we'd like to offer you a promotion. We want you to help us develop a comprehensive anti-discrimination training program for all our staff and customers. Your experience and insight would be invaluable." Aisha felt overwhelmed. This was the last thing she'd expected. I don't know what to say." "Say yes," Mr. Thompson urged. "Help us make the Golden Spoon a place where everyone is treated with respect, regardless of their background or position." As Aisha left the restaurant, her head spinning with the unexpected turn of events, her phone buzzed again. This time, it was a number she didn't recognize. "Hello," she answered cautiously. "Is this Aisha Williams?" a crisp voice asked. "Yes, it is. This is Janelle Roberts from Channel 7 News. We'd like to invite you for an exclusive interview about your experience." Over the next few days, Aisha's life became a whirlwind of interviews, meetings, and messages of support. Her story had struck a chord, sparking a national conversation about elitism, racism, and workers' rights. But as Aisha's star rose, Victoria's plummeted. The socialite, once a darling of high society, found herself at the center of a storm of public outrage. Her social media accounts were flooded with angry comments. Her business partners distanced themselves, and invitations to elite events suddenly dried up. Victoria's initial response, a carefully worded statement from her publicist expressing regret for any misunderstanding, only fueled the fire. The public saw through the non-apology, and the backlash intensified. One afternoon, as Aisha was leaving a television studio after another interview, she received a call from an unexpected source. Olivia, one of the women who had been with Victoria that night. "Aisha." Olivia's voice was hesitant, a far cry from her usual haughty tone. I wanted to apologize. What we did to you was inexcusable. I've been doing a lot of thinking, and I realize now how horrible we were." Aisha listened in silence, her emotions a complex mix of anger, vindication, and a small glimmer of hope for change. "I know saying sorry isn't enough," Olivia continued, "but I want you to know that I'm truly, deeply ashamed of my behavior. If there's anything I can do to make amends..." Aisha took a deep breath. "Thank you for apologizing, Olivia. It means a lot to hear that. But you're right. Sorry isn't enough. If you really want to make amends, start by examining your behavior and biases. Educate yourself about the experiences of people different from you, and use your privilege to make a positive difference." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then, "You're right. I will. Thank you, Aisha, for everything." As the days turned into weeks, Aisha found herself thrust into a role she'd never imagined, that of an advocate and spokesperson. She received invitations to speak at conferences, universities, and even before a congressional committee on workplace discrimination. At first, the attention was overwhelming. Aisha was used to blending into the background, to being overlooked. Now, suddenly, people were hanging on her every word. But as she shared her story again and again, she found her voice growing stronger, her message clearer. One evening, as Aisha was preparing for yet another speaking engagement, she received a call from Sandra. "Aisha, have you seen the news?" Sandra's voice was excited. Victoria just announced she's stepping down from her company's board of directors. She's also pledged a significant donation to organizations fighting workplace discrimination. Aisha sat down, stunned. Wow, I never thought. It's all because of you, Aisha, Sandra said warmly. You started a movement. People are talking about these issues in a way they never have before. As Aisha digested this news, an idea began to form in her mind. An idea that had been growing for weeks, nurtured by the stories she'd heard from countless others who'd faced similar discrimination. The next day, Aisha called a press conference. Cameras flashed and reporters jostled for position as she stepped up to the microphone. Good morning, Aisha began, her voice steady. Over the past few weeks, I've had the privilege of hearing from people all over the country who've faced discrimination and humiliation in their workplaces. Today, I'm excited to announce the creation of the Dignity at Work Foundation. A murmur ran through the crowd as Aisha continued. This foundation will provide support, legal aid, and career development opportunities for workers who face discrimination. But more than that, it will work to change the culture that allows such behavior to persist. We'll partner with companies to develop comprehensive anti-discrimination programs, and we'll advocate for stronger legal protections for workers. As Aisha outlined her vision, she felt a sense of purpose unlike anything she'd ever experienced. This was bigger than her, bigger than Victoria and her friends. This was about creating lasting change. In the months that followed, Aisha threw herself into her work with the foundation. She traveled the country, speaking to workers, employers, and policymakers. She collaborated with legal experts to draft new legislation. And she never forgot her roots, ensuring that the foundation provided practical support to those who needed it most. 1 year to the day after the incident at the Golden Spoon, Aisha found herself standing outside the restaurant once again. But this time, she wasn't here to work. She was here as a guest. As she pushed open the door, the familiar sights and sounds washed over her. But everything felt different now. The hostess greeted her with a warm smile, recognizing her immediately. Ms. Williams, welcome back. Your table is ready. Aisha followed her to a table, the same one where Victoria and her friends had sat that fateful night. As she settled in her seat, she couldn't help but reflect on how much had changed. The waiter approached, a young man with a nervous smile. Good evening, Ms. Williams. It's an honor to serve you tonight. Can I start you off with anything? Aisha smiled warmly. Just water for now, thank you. And please call me Aisha. As she sat there, sipping her water and perusing the menu, Aisha felt a profound sense of peace. She had faced humiliation and cruelty, yes, but she had also found strength she never knew she possessed. She had turned her pain into purpose, her humiliation into a movement for change. A movement caught her eye, and she looked up to see Mr. Thompson approaching her table. Aisha, he said warmly, it's wonderful to see you here as a guest. I hope you know that you'll always have a home at the Golden Spoon. Aisha smiled. Thank you, Mr. Thompson. I'm glad to be back. As Mr. Thompson moved away, Aisha's phone buzzed with a notification. It was a news alert. The Dignity at Work Act, a piece of legislation she had helped craft, had just passed in the Senate. Aisha felt tears prick her eyes as she read the headline. This was why she had endured that horrible night. This was why she had pushed through the fear and uncertainty of the past year. Because sometimes it took one person standing up to create a ripple effect of change. As she looked around the restaurant, at the diverse staff moving efficiently between tables, at the sign near the entrance outlining the establishment's zero-tolerance policy for discrimination, Aisha felt a surge of pride. She had played a part in this transformation, not just here, but in workplaces across the country. The waiter returned to take her order, and as Aisha spoke with him, she made sure to look him in the eye, to treat him with the respect and dignity that every human being deserves. Because if her journey had taught her anything, it was this. Every interaction, no matter how small, had the power to uplift or to diminish. And she had chosen, irrevocably, to be a force for uplift. As the evening wore on, Aisha found herself reflecting on the long and sometimes difficult path that had led her to this moment. She thought of her mother's unwavering support, of Sandra's belief in the power of truth, of the countless individuals who had shared their own stories of discrimination and resilience. She thought of Victoria too and the other women who had been there that night. Last she'd heard, Victoria was working with a diversity consultant, trying to understand and address her own biases. The others had taken various paths. Some, like Olivia, had reached out to apologize and make amends, while others had retreated from public life altogether. But regardless of their individual journeys, Aisha knew that the incident had sparked a broader conversation, one that was long overdue. It had forced people to confront uncomfortable truths about privilege, power, and the often invisible barriers that still existed in society. As she finished her meal, savoring every bite of the exquisitely prepared food, Aisha felt a sense of completion. She had come full circle, returning to the place where it all began. But she was not the same person who had stood here a year ago, trembling and humiliated. She was stronger now, more confident, more determined to make a difference in the world. When the bill came, Aisha reached for it without hesitation. She remembered a time when dining at a place like this would have been an unattainable dream. Now, she could afford it comfortably, thanks to her work with the foundation and her speaking engagements. But more than that, she knew she belonged here. Not because of her newfound status, but because every human being deserved to be treated with respect and dignity, regardless of their job or background. As she signed the check, leaving a generous tip, Aisha noticed a small note scrawled at the bottom of the receipt. It read, "Thank you for inspiring us all. Your courage has changed lives." Aisha felt a lump form in her throat. This, she realized, was the true measure of her journey. Not the headlines or the accolades, but the knowledge that her stand had made a real difference in people's lives. As she stood to leave, Aisha took one last look around the restaurant. She saw a diverse group of diners and staff, all coexisting in an atmosphere of mutual respect. It wasn't perfect. She knew there was still work to be done, but it was progress. Real, tangible progress. Stepping out into the cool night air, Aisha took a deep breath. The city stretched out before her, a landscape of challenges and opportunities. She didn't know exactly what the future held, but she knew one thing for certain. She would face it with courage, grace, and an unwavering commitment to justice. As she walked down the street, her heels clicking confidently on the pavement, Aisha felt a sense of hope wash over her. The world could be a cruel place, yes, but it could also be changed one brave stand at a time. And she, Aisha Williams, was living proof of that fact. The story of the black waitress and the rich women had started in humiliation and pain, but it had ended in triumph, in transformation, in the power of one person to spark a movement. And as Aisha disappeared into the bustling city night, she carried with her the knowledge that sometimes the most powerful revolutions start in the most unlikely places, even in the aisles between tables at a high-end restaurant. Her journey was far from over. There would be more battles to fight, more minds to change, more barriers to break down. But Aisha was ready. She had found her voice, her purpose, her power. And she would use them all to continue the work she had started, to build a world where dignity and respect were not privileges reserved for the few, but rights guaranteed to all. As the lights of the Golden Spoon faded behind her, Aisha smiled to herself. She had entered that restaurant a year ago as a waitress, unseen and unappreciated. She had left it tonight as a leader, an inspiration, a force for change. And in that transformation lay a powerful message for anyone who had ever felt small or powerless. You are stronger than you know. Your voice matters. And with courage and perseverance, you can change not just your own life, but the world around you. With that thought buoying her spirit, Aisha walked on into the night, ready to face whatever challenges tomorrow might bring. Because she knew now, beyond any doubt, that she had the strength to overcome them all. 2 years had passed since that fateful night at the Golden Spoon, and Aisha Williams' life had transformed in ways she could never have imagined. The Dignity at Work Foundation had grown from a fledgling idea into a powerful force for change, with offices in major cities across the country. Aisha, once a struggling waitress, was now a respected advocate, her name synonymous with workplace equality and justice. On a crisp autumn morning, Aisha stood before the mirror in her modest but comfortable apartment, adjusting her blazer. She barely recognized the woman staring back at her. Confident, poised, with a fire in her eyes that spoke of determination and purpose. As she prepared for another day of meetings and speaking engagements, her phone buzzed with a notification. It was an email from Sandra, the journalist who had helped catapult Aisha's story into the national spotlight 2 years ago. Aisha, have you seen this? We need to talk. Call me ASAP. Attached was a link to a news article. Aisha's heart raced as she read the headline. Exclusive, Victoria Harrington breaks silence, tells her side of the Golden Spoon incident. For a moment, Aisha felt as if the ground had shifted beneath her feet. Victoria, the woman whose cruel words had set this whole journey in motion, had remained largely silent since that night, save for a few carefully worded statements from her publicist. What could she possibly have to say now? With trembling fingers, Aisha dialed Sandra's number. Did you read it? Sandra asked without preamble. Just the headline, Aisha admitted. I'm not sure I want to read the rest. Sandra's voice softened. I understand. But Aisha, I think you need to see this. It's not what you might expect. Taking a deep breath, Aisha settled onto her couch and began to read the article. As she did, her eyes widened in disbelief. Victoria's words, far from being defensive or accusatory, were filled with remorse and self-reflection. She spoke of the incident as a wake-up call, a moment that had forced her to confront her own prejudices and the harm they had caused. I was raised in a bubble of privilege, Victoria was quoted as saying. I never had to consider the struggles of others, and I allowed that ignorance to turn into cruelty. What I did to Aisha Williams that night was inexcusable, and it's something I'll regret for the rest of my life. The article went on to detail Victoria's journey over the past 2 years, how she had sought therapy to address her biases, volunteered at community centers in underprivileged neighborhoods, and used her considerable resources to fund scholarships for minority students. I can never undo the hurt I caused, Victoria concluded, but I can dedicate my life to making amends and working towards a more just and equitable society. And I owe that all to Aisha Williams. Her courage in standing up to me opened my eyes and changed my life. As Aisha finished reading, she realized her cheeks were wet with tears. She had never expected this, had never even allowed herself to hope for such a profound change in Victoria. Aisha, are you still there? Sandra's voice brought her back to the present. Yes, I'm here, Aisha said softly. I don't know what to think. Victoria's publicist reached out to me, Sandra revealed. She wants to meet with you, Aisha, to apologize in person and discuss how she can support the foundation's work. Aisha felt a whirlwind of emotions. Surprise, skepticism, a cautious hope. Do you think it's genuine? She asked. I've done some digging, Sandra replied. Everything in that article checks out. Victoria's been doing this work quietly for months. This isn't a publicity stunt, Aisha. I think she's really changed. As Aisha ended the call with Sandra, her mind was reeling. The idea of facing Victoria again, after all this time, was daunting. But wasn't this exactly what she had been working towards? A world where people could acknowledge their mistakes, learn from them, and work to be better? With a deep breath, Aisha made her decision. She would meet with Victoria. The meeting was arranged for the following week at a small, neutral cafe far from the glitz of the Golden Spoon. As Aisha approached the venue, her heart pounding, she caught sight of a familiar figure already seated at an outdoor table. Victoria looked different from how Aisha remembered her. Gone was the impeccably coiffed socialite dripping with designer labels. In her place sat a woman in simple, elegant clothing, her hair pulled back in a modest ponytail. But the most striking change was in her eyes. Where once there had been cold disdain, Aisha now saw vulnerability and genuine remorse. As Aisha approached, Victoria stood, her hands clasped nervously in front of her. Aisha, she said softly, thank you for agreeing to meet with me. Aisha nodded, taking a seat across from her former tormentor. For a moment, neither woman spoke, the weight of their shared history hanging between them. Finally, Victoria broke the silence. I owe you an apology, she began, her voice trembling slightly. But I know that sorry isn't enough to erase what I did. The way I treated you that night, and on so many other occasions, it was cruel, ignorant, and deeply wrong. Aisha listened silently, her face impassive. She had imagined this moment so many times over the past 2 years, but now that it was here, she found herself at a loss for words. Victoria continued, her words coming faster now, as if she feared Aisha might leave before she could say everything she needed to. That night changed everything for me. At first, I was angry at you, at the media, at everyone who criticized me. But as the days passed, I couldn't escape the memory of the look in your eyes when I hurt you. She paused, taking a shaky breath. It forced me to really look at myself, at the person I had become, and I didn't like what I saw. I realized that my whole life, I had been using my privilege as a weapon, hurting people without even realizing the damage I was causing. Aisha finally spoke, her voice quiet but firm. Why are you telling me this now, Victoria? Why after all this time? Victoria met Aisha's gaze, and for the first time, Aisha saw no trace of the haughty socialite who had tormented her. Because I needed to do the work first, Victoria replied. I didn't want to approach you with empty words or promises. I wanted to show you, through my actions, that I was committed to change. She reached in her bag, pulling out a thick folder. This is everything I've been doing over the past 2 years. The therapy sessions, the volunteer work, the scholarships I've funded. I want you to see it all, to understand that I'm serious about making amends. Aisha took the folder, leafing through its contents. Photos of Victoria serving meals at homeless shelters, testimonials from students she had helped, records of donations to various charities. It was all there, a paper trail of redemption. I don't expect forgiveness, Victoria said softly. I know I don't deserve it, but I want you to know that you changed my life, Aisha. Your courage, your dignity in the face of my cruelty. It woke me up, and I will spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of the lesson you taught me. Aisha sat back, overwhelmed by Victoria's words and the evidence of her transformation. She had come to this meeting prepared for excuses, for half-hearted apologies. She had not expected this raw honesty, this genuine remorse. I don't know if I can forgive you yet, Victoria, Aisha said slowly. What you did, it left scars, not just on me, but on so many others who have faced similar treatment. Victoria nodded, her eyes downcast. I understand. I dash. But Aisha held up a hand, cutting her off. I'm not finished. I may not be ready to forgive, but I am ready to listen, to work together if you're truly committed to making a difference. Victoria's eyes widened in surprise. You'd be willing to work with me? After everything? Aisha nodded, a small smile playing at her lips. Isn't that what the Dignity at Work Foundation is all about? Giving people the chance to learn, to grow, to do better? If I turn my back on that principle now, I'd be betraying everything I've worked for. For the first time, Victoria smiled, a genuine, hopeful expression that transformed her face. Thank you, Aisha. I promise I won't let you down. As their meeting drew to a close, both women felt the weight of history shifting between them. They weren't friends. The wounds were still too fresh for that. But they had found a way forward, a path towards healing and positive change. Over the following months, Victoria became an unlikely but powerful ally in the fight for workplace equality. She used her connections and resources to open doors that had previously been closed to Aisha and the foundation. Together, they developed training programs for companies, worked on legislation to strengthen worker protections, and shared their story as a powerful example of the potential for change. Their partnership didn't come without challenges. There were those who criticized Aisha for working with Victoria, accusing her of selling out or being too forgiving. Others questioned Victoria's motives, skeptical of her apparent transformation. But Aisha remained steadfast in her decision. She knew that true change couldn't happen if people weren't given the chance to grow and make amends. And as she watched Victoria throw herself into the work, facing her own discomfort and pushing through it, Aisha felt a grudging respect growing for the woman she had once despised. 1 year after their first meeting at the cafe, Aisha and Victoria found themselves back at the Golden Spoon. But this time, They weren't there as waitress and customer. They were there to launch a new initiative, a comprehensive training program for the hospitality industry designed to combat discrimination and promote equality at all levels. As they stood side by side, addressing a room full of restaurant owners, managers, and staff, Aisha couldn't help but marvel at the journey that had brought them to this point. 2 years ago, I stood in this very restaurant, feeling powerless and humiliated. Aisha began, her voice strong and clear. Today, I stand here as a reminder that no one is powerless, that every voice matters, and that standing up for your dignity can create waves of change that reach far beyond yourself. She glanced at Victoria, who nodded encouragingly. But I also stand here as a testament to the power of growth and redemption. None of us are perfect. We all have biases, blind spots, and mistakes in our past. What matters is how we choose to move forward, whether we're willing to confront our flaws, learn from them, and work to be better. Victoria stepped forward, her voice humble but determined. I was the villain in Aisha's story, she admitted. I used my privilege as a weapon, causing pain and perpetuating injustice. But thanks to Aisha's courage, I was forced to confront the person I had become. And I made a choice to change. The room was silent, hanging on every word. Many in the audience had known Victoria in her previous life, had even admired or emulated her behavior. To see her now, openly acknowledging her faults and working to make amends, was a powerful sight. The program we're launching today isn't just about rules and regulations, Aisha continued. It's about creating a culture of empathy, respect, and equality. It's about recognizing the humanity in every person, regardless of their job title or background. As the presentation concluded and the room erupted in applause, Aisha felt a sense of completion. The journey that had begun with humiliation and pain had led to this moment of triumph and hope. But even as she basked in the success of the event, Aisha knew that their work was far from over. There were still battles to be fought, minds to be changed, systems to be dismantled and rebuilt. As the crowd began to disperse, Aisha felt a tap on her shoulder. She turned to find Mr. Thompson, the restaurant manager who had supported her from the beginning. Aisha, he said, his eyes shining with pride, I just wanted to say thank you. What you've done not just for this restaurant, but for the entire industry, it's incredible. Aisha smiled warmly. Thank you, Mr. Thompson. But I couldn't have done it without allies like you who were willing to listen and take action. As she made her way through the restaurant, Aisha was struck by how different it felt now. The opulent decor was the same, but the atmosphere had changed. She saw a diverse staff moving confidently between tables. Noticed the way customers interacted respectfully with their servers. It wasn't perfect. Change never is, but it was progress. Real, tangible progress. Outside, the sun was setting, casting a warm glow over the city. Aisha paused on the sidewalk, taking a moment to absorb the magnitude of the day. Aisha, Victoria's voice came from behind her. Are you all right? Aisha turned, offering a small smile. Yes, I'm fine. Just reflecting. Victoria nodded, understanding in her eyes. It's been quite a journey, hasn't it? That it has, Aisha agreed. She studied Victoria for a moment, marveling at how far they had both come. You know, there was a time when I couldn't have imagined standing in the same room as you, let alone working together. Victoria's face fell slightly. I know, and I dash. But Aisha held up a hand, cutting her off gently. I'm not saying that to make you feel guilty, Victoria. I'm saying it because I want you to understand how powerful change can be, how important it is to give people the chance to grow and learn. Victoria's eyes filled with tears. Thank you, Aisha, for giving me that chance, for showing me a better way to live. As they stood there, the unlikely allies who had become partners in a movement for change, Aisha felt a renewed sense of purpose wash over her. She thought of all the people out there who were still facing discrimination, still feeling powerless and alone. And she knew that their work, was more important than ever. Come on, Aisha said, gesturing down the street. We've got more work to do. As they walked away from the Golden Spoon, side by side, Aisha reflected on the twists and turns that had brought her to this moment. From a struggling waitress to a national advocate, from a victim of cruelty to a catalyst for change. Her journey had been extraordinary. But what struck her most was the realization that change was possible. That even the deepest wounds could heal, that the most entrenched biases could be overcome. It wasn't easy, and it didn't happen overnight. But with courage, perseverance, and a willingness to do the hard work, transformation was possible. As the city bustled around them, Aisha and Victoria continued their walk, discussing plans for their next initiative. They were an unlikely pair, the former waitress and the reformed socialite. But together, they represented hope. Hope for a world where dignity and respect were not privileges, but rights afforded to all. And as they disappeared into the crowd, their voices animated with plans and possibilities, Aisha knew that this was just the beginning. There would be more challenges to face, more battles to fight. But she was ready. They were ready. Because sometimes the most powerful changes start in the most unexpected places. And sometimes the most unlikely partnerships can create the most extraordinary transformations. The story of Aisha and Victoria, of the Golden Spoon and the Dignity at Work Foundation, would continue to inspire and challenge people for years to come. It was a reminder that no one is beyond redemption, that every voice matters, and that with courage and determination, one person really can change the world. As night fell over the city, Aisha looked up at the stars twinkling in the sky. She thought of her mother's words from so long ago. Hold your head high, baby. You're worth more than any of those fancy folks could ever know. She had held her head high. She had shown her worth. And in doing so, she had not only changed her own life, but had set in motion a wave of change that would ripple out far beyond herself. With a smile, Aisha quickened her pace, ready to face whatever challenges tomorrow might bring. Because she knew now, beyond any doubt, that she had the strength to overcome them all. And more importantly, she had the power to help others find their strength too. The night was full of possibilities, and Aisha Williams was ready to seize them all. What would you have done if you were in Aisha's position after standing up to those wealthy women? Have you ever faced similar treatment at your workplace? If you enjoyed this story, please consider subscribing to my channel. I put a lot of time and effort into crafting these impactful narratives, and your support truly means the world to me. Thank you for being a part of this journey,